Hello, I'm Charlie, and welcome back to The Distracted Gardener. I hope you're all doing well and that you're settled into the swing of the year. Before we dive into the subject of today, which is going to be about mail order vegetables, if anybody actually says mail order anymore, I want to make a point to talk a little bit about the earthquakes that have happened or had happened and are continuing to happen in Ishikawa Prefecture, just northeast here of Fukui Prefecture in Japan, and also about the Japan Airlines airplane incident that happened a couple of days ago now. Basically, about the earthquakes, there's not much to really say. There are more and more people who have turned out to have lost their lives as a result of probably the really big earthquake that happened, I think, on the 2nd. And I'm going to mention some places that you can donate at the end of the podcast today, places that I sort of checked into and seem like they're not going to take too much out of the donations, if anything at all, and we'll get it where it needs to go. I also just want to make a quick note, like I said, about the Japan Airlines airplane accident. Happened, I think, on the 3rd or the 4th of January this year. You can check out the news for yourself if it's something you want to do, but it just seems, being based here, I would be remiss not to say anything about it. And basically the only thing I have to say about it is I think it's just really too much. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it looks like somebody made a mistake, and that mistake cost 5 people their lives. And hopefully that will be the end of it. As far as this week of unfortunate news in this country anyway. I want to talk a little bit about the garden too before we hop into the main subject. I'm sorry if that was kind of a rough transition. Give me a little bit of time to smooth things out as we move deeper into this podcast. But basically, I guess the good news is that there's not really too much to talk about as far as what's happening in the garden at the moment. There's basically nothing, almost, just basically maintenance and keeping the compost going, although it is slow going because it is cold out now, of course. Basically, I go out and check to make sure that basically the bulbing plants now, all of the stuff that I planted in the lasagna bed, that should come up in a nice way in the spring. Everything looks to be doing okay. The garlic seems to be doing fine. Ordinarily it would be buried under snow at this point, but seeing as it's such a mild winter, that's not the case. And basically the only thing that I'm harvesting at this point is the occasional radish and the occasional leaf from a couple of different kinds of kale that are being grown out there. So that's it for now. To hop into today's main topic, I wonder if you've ever used a mail order service for vegetables. I suppose put a different way, because as I said, mail order seems like something that was probably used 50 years ago. But basically the idea is that instead of going to a supermarket to, buy your vegetables every week, you use basically a vegetable delivery service. Starting at the end of last November, my wife and I started using a service based in Kyoto called Sakono Tochu. The English name of the company, I think, is On the Slope. And by the way, if this is something you're interested in after I've talked about this, they are fully supportive. They have a full support system for people who only speak English, not Japanese. So there will be a link that you can check out later on should you be interested. But anyway, basically they are a service that aggregates vegetables and mushrooms and soy sauce, a lot of different products from sustainable and organic farms from around Japan, and then send it out on a weekly basis to their customers in sort of curated boxes. There are different couple of different versions of the box that you can get. There's like a seasonal box that only is for, as I said, seasonal vegetables, right? That's why it's a seasonal box. Or there's something that I think it's called like easy to use vegetables or something like that, which is, as it says, vegetables that everybody's familiar with, and things that are easy to use. As for me, I love the ease of it, and what's really great is that every time you get a package from them, of course they tell you exactly what's in the box, but next to the name of the different vegetables, it tells you what the name of the farm is, where the farm is, recommendations from the farmers about how to use the crops, maybe how the crop was raised and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of information, and that's something I really, really like. It kind of puts me at ease, kind of knowing where it came from. And I also just like that, like I said, there's that seasonal box, and that's what my wife and I subscribe to. And it's cool because, well, we've been doing it for a couple months now, but there's still always, it seems, at least one vegetable or one fruit that's included that we have never seen before, that we've never used. And so that's always an adventure. But then there's also things like, for example, satoimo, which I think is like, what even is satoimo in English? I don't know if I've ever said it in English before. Is it taro root? Is it taro? Yeah, it is taro, right? And I mean, I've used it before because my wife's grandfather has grown it in the past. But to be honest, I never really liked it. And basically the arrangement I made with my wife when we started using this service was that if we're going to put all this extra money into buying vegetables, right, because it is definitely an investment, that I would absolutely not waste anything, and I haven't so far. But so anyhow, so when taro comes, or some other vegetable that I'm not terribly familiar with, gets delivered, it's been really fun, learning how to use different things and getting to enjoy different flavors and that kind of thing. Our relatives used the service and introduced it to us after we had a long conversation, I think probably fueled by a couple of craft beers when we were all camping together a couple of months ago, and talking about the importance of being smart about how you're choosing vegetables that are grown using organic methods. And this is tied, it followed soon after a conversation about how much less nutritious vegetables that are sold in the supermarket are than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I want to point out, saying that this wasn't a conversation about choosing things that are only labeled as organic. I'm not, to be honest, too familiar exactly what the process is for getting that organic label in Japan at the moment. It's something I'm looking into, but I know, like in the States, for example, like it's a matter of basically paying cash and following a couple of rules, and then you can be labeled organic, even if what is labeled as organic is just as damaging as things that might not be sporting that label. Anyway, maybe it's news to you and maybe it isn't, but vegetables are decidedly less nutritious than they were back in the day. And when we say back in the day, we can talk about maybe from 70 or so years ago, right? And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more in detail here, but it sort of depends on the vegetable you're talking about. Looking at a study that looked at sort of like nutritional content of different foods between 1955 and 2016, there was either a 6 to 38% drop in nutrient density and mineralization when comparing vegetables from again this 2016, when things were looked at, and 1955. If you want to give a more specific example, in the link that I will share down in the show notes, there was a 23% decrease in protein levels in wheat, again in that period between 1955 and 2016. Another study looking at 43 different vegetables found an average of 16% decline in calcium levels. These are articles from the BBC, National Geographic, and also a study featured on Scientific Reports. Again, all of this will be down in the show notes. The relationship between quality of vegetable and quantity is, it seems, an inverse direct relationship, right? Incredible changes in farming methods, over the last 100 years mean overall production of food increased incredibly in the 20th century, and of course that continues on into the 21st century. But what can we take about this? Why is it the case that even though we're producing more food than probably ever have before, that oppositely nutrition, the nutrient density, again, mineralization, and all that kind of things have decreased so much? Modern large-scale farming methods are great at producing crops at great quantities, but soil destruction and destruction of the important fungal life within and a ton of other factors mean our vegetables are getting less and less nutritious. As an aside, you can hear more about how awesome fungus is, something I just briefly mentioned if you check back on episode 2 of the podcast where we talked about why I'm so obsessed about fungus these days. I don't want to support that kind of farming, and choosing not to means paying a premium for your vegetables. And that's something I said when I was talking about that service before, the Sakano Tochu service, on the slope service. But it's not just that, right? It's not just paying extra for vegetables that have gone through this more laborious or more, what should we say, natural process, I suppose, to grow these vegetables or these fruit. But it also means, as a gardener, right, that means you're putting more time into your garden to do it properly, right? Because we all know how probably easy it would be to dump a bunch of fertilizer on something and get a really big crop in a short amount of time. But I hopefully we know what the downsides are to that. But anyway, investment, right? In my personal example, I have a very limited space here on the veranda garden. I want to say, what is it even? 6 feet by 6 feet by 12 feet or so. So what is that? Let's say about 2.5 meters by 3+ meters, something like that, of space. And in that space, there's maybe 20 or 25 different planters with different things growing in them, ranging from vegetables to flowers. And in that limited space, we can grow what we can grow. And, we do what we can. It's not just for food. It's also, excuse me, there's also a section of it that's meant to be a pollinator garden. And as I say, we grow what we can grow so that, we know what the growing methods are. Hopefully, because of those growing methods, it's going to be nutritious. And we know it doesn't have to come from far away. But it is a veranda garden, and maybe I'm just not as good as I'd like to be. But it definitely doesn't allow us to sort of separate ourselves from commercially grown produce. But so now, of course, we're supplementing that with organic, or what did I say? Or organic, organic and sustainably grown vegetables from on the slope. And but the reason for that is basically, as I said, it allows me to support something that I believe in, but also I believe in the company. Their mission statement is something like farming that can continue for 100 years. The idea being that the farms that are part of their network are using sustainable methods in a way that means that they can continue forever, right? Whereas, soil degradation and other things like that lead to not being able to farm on a piece of land forever because you just degrade the property, right? I do want to point out that despite the fact that I am completely fanboying about this service, there's no relationship between me and them, other than me just being a really satisfied customer and kind of a true believer in what they stand for. No, personally, I think using a service like that serves my wife and I well. I at least for now have zero doubts that it means our nutrition has improved in the months since we started using it. I can definitely say that the amount of vegetables that we've eaten since starting to use the service has increased, and I feel like I feel healthier. It might just be some sort of placebo effect kind of thing happening. But I'm also certain that supporting sustainable regenerative farms is kind of the only sensible thing to do with everything that's happening in the world. But I've had sort of a nagging suspicion or a nagging doubt or a nagging worry, I suppose, at the back of my mind since I started using the service about whether or not using a service like that is maybe possibly doing more harm than good. And that comes down to the problems with food mileage, right? And that's something I've been concerned about for a long time, and it's been very popular. This slogan, "Eat local," right? Don't get your veg shipped in when you can just get them from next door. That's what the whole idea of food mileage is, right? How far did your food have to travel to get to your house, basically? Or put another way, to get to the supermarket in which you bought it at. Now, a quick Google search for food miles US or similar search queries will lead you to a statistic. And the statistic that you will find most commonly is something like our food travels an average of 1,500 miles before it arrives in our homes, right? So that's over 2,000 kilometers, right? It should be noted, however, the studies bearing that statistic are older and they could be outdated. But that sounds like a lot, that sounds like an awful long way for a tomato to travel when you could just sort of get one from your neighbor or a farmer that lives, I don't know, 3 miles or 5 kilometers from where you do, kind of thing. A lot of people will ask, I think, and it's something I've asked myself before, is like, why is it so important to think about food mileage? And it seems like, it just seems like a bad idea to increase greenhouse gas emissions to ship tomatoes across, a continent, if again you can just get them from a nearby town. And we also just talked about decrease in nutrient content, nutritional quality, and I'm sure you're aware, like when you get a tomato at the store, for example, it's probably harvested super early. It's probably artificially ripened. It may have gone through some kind of long-term preservation process. So a lot of times, a fresh tomato you can buy at the store might be like, it might be 6 weeks old, and it might be fresh looking and even fresh feeling, but it may not be fresh in as far as its content is concerned, and that's to say nothing about the flavor. If ever you've tasted a tomato that you've grown versus a tomato that you can buy at the store, I think that's probably something that speaks for itself. But just sort of thinking about that without thinking about any of the data or anything like that, it just seems like as much as possible local food, food with as low food mileage as possible is kind of the way to go. And so this got me thinking, by using a service like Sakanotochu, right, this on the slope service, am I doing more harm than good? Because as I said, this is a service that's based in Kyoto, but it aggregates these sort of sustainable, organic, regenerative farms from around the country, and then it sends those products that they've gotten from those farmers to me, and to their other customers individually. And I don't want to do that, because I am trying my best not to be a part of the problem. And so, especially recently, I've been wondering if by using a service like this, I'm completely violating something that I believe in. I wonder if by having vegetables shipped in this way, if sort of like the cost of using fuel and the emissions that come from the fuel doesn't sort of outweigh the benefits to like my health and the benefits to the planet, because of the farmers that are producing the produce that's being sent to me, is better for the world, if those benefits aren't sort of outweighed by emissions from shipping. And so I did as much as I could, I suppose, to dive into the topic. And one thing that really sort of surprised me is that I was sort of making an assumption about how much food transportation plays into sort of the pollution of it, right? The pollution that comes out of that system. And I'll include a link to a really neat graph illustrating the point in the show notes, but transport apparently typically accounts for less than 10% of the emissions tied to food production. I suppose in my imagination it was something closer to 25% or even 30%, something like that. But it seems that the biggest culprits, it turns out, aren't transportation or packaging or even energy use at the supermarket, right? Like I always see the ice cream case and I wonder how much energy are they using by keeping the ice cream cold or whatever. But it just seems like it's not as big of a thing. as at least I was thinking. Rather, the most important factor in the sort of a footprint a food will have are the farming methods used, e.g., for example, did I say e.g.? For example, fertilizer usage, emissions from farm equipment, things of that nature. And the other is something labeled as land use change. Land use change is defined as deforestation and other biosphere impediments above ground and subterranean changes to carbon content. In other words, things like clearing forests, right? This is a problem, of course, in South America, to make farmland and tilling fields, releasing previously sequestered carbon in huge quantities into the atmosphere. Shares of total emissions by food type are shown in the graph I mentioned and are most easy to see when looking at beef. Recently, this is something I think you hear an increasing amount about, is that it's not cars, or it's not using computers or whatever, that energy usage necessarily that's the biggest player in human caused climate change. It is livestock production. And looking at beef, right? So the thing, maybe the villain that comes up most often in that conversation, more than 50% of emissions from the production of beef are directly a result of farming methodology. And land use change makes up around 25%. Looking at our friend chocolate, right? Love some chocolate. Approximately 75% and 20% of emissions from chocolate farming come from land use change and farming methodology, respectively. All this to say that it seems that more than focusing completely on eating local, one would do better to focus on eating, to use an overused word or lack of anything better, ethically. Now, what does that mean, right? What does it mean, ethical? It means that if you're given the choice between vegetables shipped in from 100 miles out that are grown on farms that protect the soil and the environments that they're in, and local vegetables being raised by farmers destroying the soil biome and sending tons of carbon into the air, you're in better shape choosing that first example, right? And again, we go back to this word ethical, and I think we can think of the word ethical as protecting the land and being careful about how you're farming. And I think, of course, there's also the human element and the human cost and all that to consider. But it seems like for the point of our conversation here, you're much better off choosing something farther away that is farming, should we say, properly, than something closer, farm closer that is not. And I have to admit that when I started out researching for this episode, it was with a genuine question: is it better to eat local and less ethical? There's that word again. Or more ethical and less local? And I have to say, I'm happy to have my hope that ethical would win out backed. Because again, I'm very, very happy with sort of the situation we're in at the moment. But of course, I think the absolute best option would be to find local farms that are careful about land use change and about their farming methodology. Because, then you eliminate those two most important factors when it comes to producing food in a way that is not damaging to the planet, but also you also eliminate transport, and you can get rid of that concern of food mileage. Again, all of the things I've talked about today, except for, of course, the opinion-based stuff, is based on articles and reports and things of that nature that I will share all of in the show notes. So please feel free to look into that. And that's where we'll call it for today. I'm really interested to know what decides where you shop and what kind of food you buy. Is it price? Are you thinking about things like nutrient density, emissions, food mileage? Please let me know. You can get at me over at naturalfukui.com or on Instagram and Twitter at naturalfukui. Lastly, before I sign off for today, anyone interested in donating to help with relief efforts following the earthquakes in Ishikawa, Japan, can find links to Yahoo Bokin Netto and the Japanese Red Cross in the show notes. Both seem to get donations where they need to go without taking out exorbitant fees. That means when you donate to these organizations, you can rest assured that most, if not all, of the money you donated will go directly to helping people who are still suffering after losing homes, losing loved ones, after the earthquakes at the beginning of this year. Please note, however, that both websites are in Japanese. I will be sharing international services that you can use to donate money in the future once I have more chance to look into them fully. Again, I will be sharing that in a later episode of the podcast, and also over on Twitter /AccessTwix.